What happens when a war movie feels too real for comfort? When soldiers who lived through it cannot sit through the final reel? Some films do not just depict combat, they resurrect trauma. These are not Hollywood fantasies, they are emotional minefields. From shell-shocked veterans leaving theaters to governments calling for bans, these films blurred the line between acting and actual survival. Number 15. Come and See, 1985. Praised as one of the most harrowing war films ever made, Come and See was a Soviet masterpiece that shocked audiences into silence. Director Alem Klimov's vision of Nazi atrocities in Belarus was so authentic that veterans reportedly wept or left the theater unable to relive their memories. The film's unflinching realism came from an uncompromising process: live ammunition, real explosions, and psychological torment inflicted on its young lead actor. 14-year-old Alexei Kravchenko was hypnotized between takes to withstand the horror sequences. Klimov refused to allow fake fire or sound stages. Every village burning, every scream of the dying was staged in the real environment of wartime ruins. The Soviet government initially resisted its release, fearing the film was too traumatic even for propaganda. Yet when it finally premiered, veterans said it was not a movie. It was truth. Come and See's legacy remains unmatched. It stripped away every heroic illusion of war, leaving nothing but madness and mourning. Decades later, even modern soldiers who served in Afghanistan and Chechnya confessed they could not watch it twice. Klimov retired afterward, saying he had said everything he needed to about war, and no film since has dared come so close to pure human despair. Number 14. The Thin Red Line, 1998. Terrence Malick's poetic vision of Guadalcanal divided critics and veterans alike. Unlike the explosive patriotism of most war films, The Thin Red Line turned inward, into the psyche of soldiers drowning in nature's indifference. The lush island looked like paradise, but the violence that erupted across it mirrored man's fall from grace. Veterans of the Pacific Campaign walked out complaining that the film's detached tone brought back too much silence, the kind that comes right before artillery fire. Malick's process bordered on chaos. He shot millions of feet of film, rewriting scenes daily, cutting entire performances by major stars. The film became a meditation on morality more than strategy. Yet its slow realism, the sweat, confusion, and screaming without orchestral guidance, hit real veterans harder than any Hollywood explosion. Many felt the film captured something unseen, the moral disintegration of the human spirit under fire. The U.S. military quietly distanced itself from the production, providing minimal cooperation after early footage showed soldiers abandoning orders and sanity. But Malick did not want heroes. He wanted lost souls. Over time, critics recognized it as one of the most spiritual anti-war statements in cinema history. For some veterans, it remained too close to their own ghosts to ever finish. Number 13. Platoon, 1986. Oliver Stone's Platoon was not imagined. It was remembered. Stone fought in Vietnam and returned to Hollywood to make sense of his nightmares. The film exploded onto screens like a confession. It was brutal, intimate, and unbearably human. For many Vietnam veterans, it was the first time they saw their pain without patriotic filters. Some left screening shaking, others cried in lobbies saying this was not acting, it was reliving. The cast underwent a real boot camp in the Philippine jungle under the command of Vietnam veteran Dale Dye. They slept in mud, ate rations, and carried live ammunition. Stone demanded exhaustion, confusion, and fear because that was how it really felt. The Pentagon refused to officially endorse the movie, fearing its portrayal of internal chaos and moral collapse would damage military image. When Platoon won the Oscar for Best Picture, Stone dedicated it to the men who did not come home. Yet not all veterans were thankful. Some called it too real too soon. Decades later, psychologists used scenes from the film in PTSD therapy, describing it as cinema that bleeds. Its legacy reshaped how Hollywood depicted war, less about glory, more about survival and guilt. Stone once said he made Platoon to purge his demons. For many who lived Vietnam, it only reopened theirs. Number 12. Saving Private Ryan, 1998. When Saving Private Ryan premiered, veterans of Normandy sat in silence, some unable to breathe. The opening D-Day sequence was so graphic that trauma counselors were stationed in lobbies across the United States. Steven Spielberg's recreation of the Omaha Beach landing was not spectacle. It was sensory overload. Every bullet whistled like memory, every explosion ripped through the audience like flashbacks. Many veterans simply walked out whispering they had seen enough in real life. Spielberg refused to romanticize anything. He shot the invasion with handheld cameras, desaturated color, and unscored chaos. The sound design replicated tinnitus and the disorientation of shell shock. The Department of Veterans Affairs received calls from former soldiers who said the film reopened wounds they thought were long healed. One viewer said it was not a movie, it was reliving hell. The production itself was physically punishing. The cast underwent real boot camps led by former Marines to capture exhaustion and fear. Tom Hanks later said the mud and the cold became characters themselves. Spielberg fought studio resistance to keep the film nearly 3 hours long, refusing to cut the opening sequence despite executives calling it unwatchable. When the film was screened in Washington, D.C., veterans cried, embraced, and left before the credits. Saving Private Ryan became both therapy and torment, a cinematic tombstone for those who never came home. It redefined realism in war cinema, but at a heavy cost. Viewers realized some truth is too real for entertainment. Number 11. Full Metal Jacket, 1987. Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket was not made for comfort. It was made for confrontation. The film's infamous boot camp sequence turned actor R. Lee Ermey's drill instructor into an icon of cruelty and control. Veterans said they could smell the barracks, the sweat, and the fear. Many who trained under real drill sergeants said they could not sit through it. Some walked out shaking, others said they felt they were back at Paris Island. Kubrick shot the entire Vietnam War in England, transforming industrial zones into burned-out villages. Every explosion was precise, every scream rehearsed until it sounded natural. The first half of the film broke men in training. The second half showed what was left of them. Kubrick's portrayal of dehumanization mirrored what veterans later called the moral corrosion of warfare. The studio feared the lack of a traditional hero would alienate audiences. But Kubrick insisted war itself was the villain. He banned background music in most battle scenes to emphasize mechanical chaos. The result was a film that felt less like a narrative and more like a psychological dissection. When Full Metal Jacket premiered, critics were divided. Veterans either praised it as the most honest portrayal of military conditioning or condemned it as too raw to endure. The film remains one of the few that soldiers admit they cannot rewatch. Kubrick's obsession with control became a mirror for the system itself, breaking men until they forgot who they were fighting for. Number 10. The Deer Hunter, 1978. Before Apocalypse. Now there was The Deer Hunter, a film that dared to show what war did after the bullets stopped. Michael Cimino's epic followed a group of Pennsylvania steelworkers before, during, and after Vietnam. What began as a small-town drama turned into a nightmare of captivity, trauma, and disconnection. Veterans across America left theaters midway through saying it hit too close to the bone. The infamous Russian roulette scenes became cultural shockwaves. Many believed they exaggerated reality, but veterans said the terror and unpredictability captured the psychological torture they lived daily. The film's raw emotion caused nervous breakdowns among viewers who had served in Vietnam. One man reportedly fainted during the theater sequence in Chicago, saying he had seen that fear before, in his friend's eyes. Production was chaotic. Cimino demanded real fear from his cast, sometimes firing blanks close to actors' heads. Robert De Niro refused body doubles, enduring freezing rivers and gunfire. The film ballooned over budget and schedule, but its realism became legendary. Yet controversy followed. Critics accused it of racism and exaggeration, while the Soviet Union banned it for its portrayal of the Viet Cong. Despite backlash, The Deer Hunter won 5 Academy Awards. It cemented the notion that the true story of war begins when the fighting ends. Cimino's masterpiece still divides audiences, but one thing is certain: few who lived the real war ever made it to the end credits. Number 9. Apocalypse Now, 1979. Apocalypse Now was not just a film, it was a descent into madness that mirrored the Vietnam War itself. Francis Ford Coppola created a jungle nightmare so real that both actors and soldiers who watched it felt the same dread. Many veterans left screenings unable to continue through its chaotic finale, saying it captured their memories too perfectly. The movie became an endurance test, not entertainment. Coppola filmed in the Philippines during monsoon season where real storms destroyed sets and halted production. He fired his lead actor, replaced him, and then faced heart attacks, mental breakdowns, and drug addiction on set. The sound of helicopters was not from Hollywood libraries. It came from actual military aircraft supplied by the Philippine Army fighting rebels nearby. It blurred fiction and war until no one could tell them apart. When the film premiered at Cannes, many walked out during the infamous massacre and ritual scenes. Critics called it operatic chaos, but veterans said it felt like reliving the psychological collapse they had fought to forget. The Pentagon refused any official association with the project, calling it morally corrosive. The film's legacy is colossal. Apocalypse now remains a mirror to the human psyche under war's pressure, where sanity burns with the jungle. Coppola once said he was not making a movie about Vietnam, he was making Vietnam. For many who lived it, those words were no exaggeration, and that was why they could not stay until the end. Number 8. Black Hawk Down, 2001. Ridley Scott's Black Hawk Down hit screens like a shockwave. Based on the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, it was praised for precision and intensity, but for many modern veterans it felt like reopening a wound that had never healed. Soldiers who had fought in Somalia walked out in silence, saying it was too close, too vivid, too loud. Scott used actual military consultants and even had real Rangers and Delta Force members on set. The urban combat scenes were choreographed with the same tactics used in Mogadishu. Every gunfire flash, every scream, every radio call was grounded in real after-action reports. The Pentagon cooperated but later grew uneasy with the brutal realism and emotional toll on service members. Some screenings were halted after veterans reported panic attacks. The Department of Defense faced backlash for approving a film that made modern warfare look like a never-ending trap of chaos and confusion. Critics praised its technical perfection, but questioned if it went too far. Behind the camera, the shoot was just as dangerous. Filmed in Morocco under scorching heat, actors fainted and weapons misfired. Ridley Scott pushed realism to its limit, refusing clean edits or heroic framing. The result was a movie so authentic it felt like classified footage from a lost war. Its legacy remains conflicted. Some called it the most realistic modern combat film ever made, others called it unbearable to those who lived it. Either way, Black Hawk Down left its audience breathless and broken in equal measure. Number 7. The Battle of Algiers, 1966. When the Battle of Algiers premiered, it was banned in France for 5 years. The film's depiction of urban guerrilla warfare during the Algerian struggle for independence was so realistic that both revolutionaries and military strategists used it as a training film. Veterans of colonial wars could not endure its brutal honesty, and many walked out saying it was like watching their own ghost on screen. Director Guillo Pontecorvo shot the film in a documentary style using handheld cameras and non-professional actors. Every chase bombing and interrogation was reconstructed in the real streets where it once happened. French officials accused the film of being propaganda, while critics hailed it as truth filmed in daylight. The Pentagon even screened it for officers studying urban insurgency tactics, acknowledging its accuracy. But that accuracy came at a price. The film's unflinching portrayal of torture and civilian casualties drew outrage and censorship. French veterans groups protested screenings, saying it reopened wounds and humiliated those who had served. In Algeria, however, crowds cheered and cried, seeing their struggle finally immortalized without filters. Over the decades, the Battle of Algiers has been studied, dissected, and feared. It remains a film that governments love in secret and soldiers dread in public. Its realism was so pure that it transcended cinema, becoming an unintentional manual for both resistance and repression. For those who knew the real war, it was not a movie. It was memory carved in black and white. Number 6. Hacksaw Ridge, 2016. Mel Gibson's Hacksaw Ridge delivered one of the most intense depictions of heroism ever filmed, yet its realism made many veterans turn away. The story of Desmond Doss, a medic who refused to carry a weapon but saved 75 men during the Battle of Okinawa, was both uplifting and unbearable. The brutality of Gibson's vision forced soldiers who had seen combat to relive every scream, every splatter of mud, every second of helplessness. The film's production aimed for authenticity above all. Gibson ordered real explosions near the actors and used prosthetics so realistic that even medics on set said it looked like field trauma. Andrew Garfield, who portrayed Doss, went through spiritual exhaustion filming scenes where he dragged bodies under relentless fire. Many veterans praised the film's courage, but others admitted they could not stay seated past the first assault. Critics hailed Hacksaw Ridge as an anti-war masterpiece that honored faith and endurance. Yet its violence became a moral argument of its own. Churches debated its graphic imagery. Theaters in Japan temporarily postponed screenings due to complaints about its emotional impact on older veterans. Gibson refused to tone it down, saying war is not clean and heroism is not glamorous. The film won 2 Academy Awards and gave Doss's story global recognition. Still, for many who fought in modern conflicts, Hacksaw Ridge was too close to the heart. It reminded them that courage often bleeds and salvation rarely comes without scars. Number 5. Paths of Glory, 1957. Stanley Kubrick's Paths of Glory remains one of the earliest films to show war as a factory of moral decay. Based on World War I trench battles, it stripped away every illusion of valor. Soldiers crawl through mud, officers hide behind strategy, and human life becomes disposable. French soldiers who fought in the Great War walked out unable to bear the familiar trenches and hopeless commands. Kubrick's attention to realism was legendary. He built full-scale trenches shot in claustrophobic corridors and forced actors to crawl through real mud mixed with smoke and fire. The film condemned military arrogance, showing innocent soldiers executed for cowardice to protect reputations. France banned it for nearly 20 years, calling it anti-national and demoralizing. Veterans groups demanded it never be shown again, but its impact was unstoppable. Critics called it a moral earthquake. Kirk Douglas, who starred in it, said he had never seen a film so honest about betrayal within ranks. The film received limited release but grew into a cult classic, studied in military ethics courses worldwide. Decades later, generals privately admitted it captured the tragedy of leadership lost in pride. Paths of Glory remains Kubrick's most restrained and devastating work. It taught audiences that sometimes courage is not charging forward, but standing up against the madness of command. For soldiers who knew that pain, the film was not fiction, it was a mirror. Number 4. Assembly, 2007. Assembly remains one of the most emotionally crushing war films of the 21st century, a movie so realistic that veterans of the Chinese Civil War reportedly left theaters in silence. The story follows Captain Gu Ziti, a soldier ordered to fight until the last man while surrounded by chaos. What shook audiences was not heroism but exhaustion, confusion, and the terrifying possibility of dying unrecognized. Many older viewers said the film reopened memories they had buried for half a century. Director Feng Xiaogang pushed for frightening authenticity. Actors lived in trenches, trained with real units, and endured battlefield simulations. Explosions were staged only meters away, sending performers crashing into the mud. The film's bleak palette, gray skies, smoky air, and bodies lost in fog created a realism that veterans described as too close to the truth. But its deepest wound comes after the fighting ends. Gu Ziti's struggle to prove his fallen men existed exposed a painful national reality. Thousands of soldiers vanished from records without acknowledgement. Authorities initially hesitated to promote the film, calling its themes emotionally risky. Yet international critics declared it China's most honest war drama. To surviving veterans, Assembly was not entertainment. It was memory returning with force. Number 3. Das Boot, 1981. Wolfgang Petersen's Das Boot remains one of the most suffocating war films ever made. Set almost entirely inside a German U-boat, it captured the crushing claustrophobia of submarine warfare with such terrifying realism that even modern naval officers reportedly could not finish watching. Veterans of the Kriegsmarine called it the closest anyone had come to recreating their nightmares. Some walked out of theaters drenched in sweat, saying the pressure felt real again. The production became an endurance test for cast and crew. Peterson built a full-scale submarine interior mounted on hydraulics that tossed actors violently during depth-charge sequences. The set was so tight that the camera had to move through hidden rails, forcing the crew to crawl between takes. The actors were locked inside for hours, breathing recycled air drenched in condensation and oil. Peterson wanted the smell of fear to be visible. Every sound was authentic. The creaks of metal, the hiss of valves, the groans of depth compression were recorded from real submarine hulls. The result was a film that suffocated its audience as effectively as the ocean it depicted. German veterans praised its honesty but also condemned it for reawakening the terror of waiting to die hundreds of meters below the surface. The government hesitated to support its release, fearing it might reignite national guilt. Yet Das Boot became an international phenomenon, redefining war cinema through silence and confinement instead of explosions. Peterson refused to show glory, only exhaustion, despair, and survival stripped of ideology. Decades later, real submariners screened it during training but admitted it was almost too accurate. The film's legacy outlived its politics and became a haunting memorial to every man who drowned unseen beneath the waves. For those who lived inside those steel coffins, Das Boot was not a movie. It was a resurrection of pressure, darkness, and fear. Number 2. Fires on the Plain, 1959. Kon Ichikawa's Fires on the Plain remains one of Japan's most disturbing depictions of war and despair. Set in the Philippines during the final days of World War II, it follows starving soldiers wandering through death rot and insanity. When it premiered, Japanese veterans reportedly wept or left theaters whispering that it felt like being back in hell. The realism was not visual spectacle, it was spiritual decay made visible. Ichikawa abandoned heroism and replaced it with survival at its ugliest. His soldiers did not march, they crawled through swamps, feeding on whatever life still twitched. The director refused to sanitize anything. He studied photographs of war casualties and replicated the exact body language of men dying slowly. Lead actor Eiji Funakoshi lost significant weight for the role, collapsing several times under the tropical heat. Japanese officials were divided. Some said it dishonored the army, others said it was the first time truth had been spoken. The film was censored on television for years due to graphic imagery of starvation and moral collapse. Veterans condemned its brutality but secretly admitted it was accurate down to the silence between gunfire and the endless hunger that followed. Critics abroad hailed it as the Eastern answer to Paths of Glory. Ichikawa's meticulous direction turned every frame into an elegy for lost humanity. The final scene, a lone soldier staring at meaningless smoke, became a symbol of post-war disillusionment. Decades later, Japanese schools used it as a cautionary tool, but some survivors still refused to watch. Fires on the Plain transcended cinema. It became an open wound for a nation struggling to face its own past. For those who lived through that collapse, it was not acting. It was confession. Number 1. Grave of the Fireflies, 1988. Although animated, Grave of the Fireflies is one of the most devastating war films ever created, so painful that many Japanese war survivors admit they cannot watch it to the end. Based on Akiyuki Nosaka's real experiences as a child, the film follows siblings Seita and Setsuko struggling to survive after the firebombing of Kobe. Older veterans reportedly left screenings with tears, saying the film brought back memories they had kept silent for decades. Director Isao Takahata approached the story with documentary-level precision. His team studied bomb damage reports, visited surviving neighborhoods, and recreated details of ration shortages, destroyed homes, and post-air raid refugee shelters. What seemed like simple animation became an emotionally surgical reconstruction of wartime Japan. Broadcasters hesitated to air it at first, fearing the psychological impact on elderly viewers. When it finally appeared on television, hospitals reported increased anxiety among those who had lived through the firebombings. Modern humanitarian veterans also describe the film as too real, not for violence but for its portrayal of helplessness. What sets Grave of the Fireflies apart is its focus on civilians, children who have no weapons, no protection, and no future. For many who survived the war's aftermath, the film is impossible to finish. It is not animation, it is remembrance. These films broke the boundary between screen and soul. They forced audiences to confront the cost of survival and the echoes of horror that never fade. Which of these would you dare to finish without looking away? Tell us below and share your thoughts. Like, subscribe, and join us again as we reveal more stories cinema tried to bury.